Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are, and welcome to the first Bite-Size Rum Series webinar. The WSET is running in collaboration with WSPA, the West Indian Rum Spirits Producers Association. My name's Nick, and I work at the WSET, and I am in charge of the spirits qualifications. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, WSET, is the world's leading provider of qualifications and courses in wine, spirits, sake and beer. And we've gained a lot of experience over the last 50 years that we've been running these courses. And they help both wine professionals, spirits professionals and consumers alike. Now you can take our qualifications in over 70 countries through a network of over 800 course providers. And if you're interested in finding out more about embarking on your own WSET journey, visit wsetglobal.com to find your nearest course provider. So there are a couple of housekeeping bits that I just kind of need to get out of the way before we get on to the main course. First of all, this session is being recorded and it will be available later on the WSET Events Hub on the YouTube channel. So you can watch after that if you wish to. And if you want to communicate with us and ask questions, can you please use the Q&A box, which you should find down somewhere on your screen, depending on kind of how you're viewing this. And also, we're going to be sending out a short feedback survey after the webinar. And it'll be really great to hear your thoughts and how we can improve on this series. So with all that out of the way, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Shaun Caleb, who is the master distiller at the Diamond Distillery, which is one of the most unique distilleries in the world. I think that could be said without fear of contradiction. So let me very now swiftly hand over to Shaun and say welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Nick. And thank you to the WSET team in collaboration with WSPA for presenting this bite-sized rum series. It's my pleasure today to talk to our audience. Thank you all for joining on Guyana, and in particular, how at Demerara Distillers, representing Guyanese rums, we are the purveyors of our heritage. And in doing so, we bring an element of modern innovation into our traditional practices. When I speak about Guyana rums, I'll speak specifically about Demerara rums, which is the county where the rums in Guyana is fermented and distilled. Where's Demerara? It's on the northern coast of South America. So to the left, you'll see a map there of South America, showing where it's situated just north of Brazil, east of Venezuela, just on the Atlantic coast. So we do benefit from all the Atlantic trade winds that makes the place nice and cool, even though we're equatorial and hot and humid. We get that nice cool sea breeze to make the perfect balance of climate. That's perfect also for making rum and aging rums and producing rums as fine as quality as we do produce. In terms of the history of Demerara and its rum production, we are, of course, known for making rums for over 300 years. And so we've developed over that time quite a steep tradition in terms of the quality and the character of the rums that we produce. So much so that at one stage, we were the producers of the lion's share of what was the daily ration to the British Royal Navy and many other long-standing rums. So Demerara certainly prides itself in its rum production heritage. And so today I'm proud to talk you through a bit about that heritage, but also how we marry that heritage with modern practices that we have now brought into our production. But before getting into that, to tell you a bit about our history. So Guyana, of course, was founded on the need for cultivation of sugar, of course, the sailing of the European settlers to find new lands for production of that sweetener, to fill that sweet tooth in Europe. Guyana, of course, was very fundamental in that because of the size of the territory. Our country is certainly large compared to many of the Caribbean islands that are neighboring to us. And because of that, we were very fertile for production of sugarcane. It was the Dutch who first landed in 1616, and of course then introduced sugar in 1640, once they were able to establish the Guyana coast. The British, however, recognizing that the Dutch had such vast land available to them, they come knocking by 1650s, thereabouts. And after a period of time, we're able to start setting up plantation. Ultimately, they brought distillation over in 1670. By 1832, Guyana became fully British controlled. And so from that time onwards, the British had set up a number of plantations throughout the entire colony. So much so that by 1880, there were over 300 sugar plantations growing in Guyana, each with a small distillery attached. Yes, you heard me correctly. There were over 300 distilleries going in Guyana at one stage, as many as 380. However, because the world continued to change, European powers began to, or continued, I should say, to fight for control of the territory. Trade policies began to change. Taxes were introduced on sugar from cane sources so as to keep British colonies' sources out of mainland Europe, etc., who, of course, wanted to protect their own sugar beet producers. That and many other factors, the abolition of slavery being another, which obviously influenced the availability of labor. For many, many reasons, sugar became less profitable because of changing economic climate globally. And because of that, many of the local plantations, frankly, some were abandoned, some were closed, some were amalgamated. That process continued all the way until the early 20th century. An important milestone is 1942, at which point there were only 9 active distilleries in operation on 16 active sugar plantations. That's important because from that point on, the plantations and the distilleries in particular did survive up to that point, were maintained in operation going forward. Because those distilleries would, of course, at that time been originally installed, in some cases, way back in the 18th century, 1732 being the oldest case, and because they were preserved from that time onwards, we are today able to boast some of the oldest stills because we carry all of that heritage from 1732, from 1820, from 1920, all the way through to our most modern stills. Today, there's only one distillery in Guyana, which houses and boasts all of these stills, capturing the full heritage of distilling in Guyana. It's all happening in Demerara County. And so, yes, we are the proud purveyors of Demerara rums. That history, though, is important and is especially important because the practices that have earned the Demerara that heritage and that character and that reputation has to be maintained. So we're very serious about ensuring that those traditional practices carry through in everything that we do, from fermentation all the way through. Most importantly, though, the distinguishing features of Demerara rum is made most alive in the craft distillation approach. By craft, I mean that, yes, we still do use those small craft stills. In fact, the great share of our heritage and our premium rum production comes from those stills. And I'll talk a bit more about those stills in a few. There are different types. We have wooden pots, we have wooden columns, we have metal columns of various types. They really do cover a wide variety of types of stills. But regardless of which still we use, the distilling philosophy remains the same. Every single batch that is distilled on our heritage still is produced with its full character, which means that when it comes to blending, we are not trying to add deficit or to make up for some missing quality. Each individual distillate has its full character. So when we blend, we're actually combining characters to make a more complex profile. It is why, in fact, the most famous of the Demerara rums today, El Dorado, is known for its complexity and its smoothness because they really are blends of so many interesting distillates that are combined together to make them even more interesting. So that uniqueness and complexity really derives from our versatility of distilling capacity. And all of that, in turn, owes to our traditional approach to distilling. To talk a bit more about some of our stills, our most famous stills are our heritage stills, the wooden stills in particular. We are the owners, the operators of one-of-a-kind stills. We're the only distillery in the world that still produces rum on wooden stills. We have a double wooden pot still that dates back to 1732, a single wooden pot still that dates back to 1820, and wooden coffee still that dates back to 1880, all of which continue to be in production. What's interesting about these stills, though, is that each of them produces a very different kind of spirit. Yes, they're all made of good old Guyanese green heart, but the style of distillation has a huge impact on the quality of spirit. Because of that, we are able to appeal, although being a rum producer, to spirits connoisseurs across many different spirit types. For example, we've been able to have conversations with cognac lovers who appreciate the coffee chocolate type notes coming from our single wooden pot still, or malt lovers who appreciate a bit more of leather and wood, hint of peat that comes from our double wooden pot still, of course, once aged appropriately. And for those bourbon drinkers who wish something a bit lighter, more spirituous, but still fruity and aromatic, lots of vanilla notes, certainly we have something there for you too. The wood makes a huge difference, but also the style of still. And because we have carried these stills for all of those centuries, and we're the only ones who have done so, then we're the only ones that can produce this wide variety, this versatility of different rum spirit profiles. To tell you a bit more about our wooden pot, and in particular, this is where I want to maybe seg into how the heritage isn't the only game in town. We do bring that modern approach to overlay what we do currently. So our double wooden still, for instance, produces for sure a very heavy body distillate. By heavy bodied, I mean in terms of esters, we can produce more than 50 parts per million compared to 10 for a light rum. And in terms of the heavier congener, which is where the bulk of the body comes from, well over 300, well over 300, again, compared to about 10 or so, and less for a light rum. Because of the presence of all of those heavier congeners, not just the amount, but the variety of different heavier components that are present, there's a synergy of note that tends to produce, when aged, a wide variety of different taste profiles. For example, there's some components that combine to produce a nutty sort of note. So we can think of almonds, we can think of hazelnut as two examples, or maybe spicy, licorice as an example. Some still may emerge into a woodier type note, some herbal, some earthy. There really is a lot of complexity that comes because, in the first place, we start with a very rich fermentation brew from which we extract specific congeners that once aged in the barrel, those aging reactions take place in such an accelerated fashion, of course, in tropical equatorial climate, that a lot of complexity emerges because of the advancement of those aging reactions in the barrel. Because of that complexity, though, we have to be very specific in terms of the profile that we're looking for. And this is where some of the science comes in. All right. We have been able to narrow down. So if, for instance, we are looking for a note that is a bit more like a sweeter woodier type note, like cedar smoke, if you can imagine what that is, then we have been able to narrow down what are the components that lend themselves after aging to those specific profiles. And so in fermentation and in distillation, we coax the process to prejudice the generation of those components, either their precursors or their derivatives, so that at the end of the day, when the rum comes out of the barrel, we're able to have that particular profile being emphasized. As distinct, for example, from if we're looking for a more earthy, leathery type note. Now, the components responsible for those, the chemical components, are different. And so here again, we can tweak the process so as to emphasize those notes more than others. Sorry. For example, in the fermentation process, we can tweak the conditions to favor certain congener types. We can change the nutrient dosage because we have a lot of native species, native bacteria and yeast that are present as well. We can tweak the nutrient mix so as to emphasize certain congeners being produced as opposed to others. Sometimes when we get it just right, we may recycle some of the sludge from one batch into a subsequent batch. So again, so as to prefer the formation of those congeners. And so with that and many other techniques, the flavor profile and the combination can be varied and controlled so as to ensure that exactly the note we're looking for, if it's 12 years or 15 years hence, we can start at day number 0 with the right conditions at fermentation and distillation. I skipped ahead a bit prematurely there, but I want to talk a bit about our heritage column stills. And again, to show how the heritage that we carry is now overlaid with the modern approach to ensuring we maintain that consistency. We, of course, have many different column stills. We have coffee stills, we have Saval stills as examples. Those stills produce a very wide range of rums from light and medium body. All right. The craft for us means that we, first of all, have to know the characteristic of those individual distillates and understand what are the components that are responsible for the profile of those individual distillates. All right. For instance, if we're looking for a rum with very specific fruity type notes, for example, we may wish to have something with a bit more orange, as opposed to, let us say, another rum with a bit more banana. Now, both of those are produced because of esters. And so we can manipulate through the distillation process which of the esters we augment in the distillation offtake, so that if it's an orange we're looking for, we know where to find it and how to coax that out into the product zone, as opposed to if it's banana, how do we coax that instead? Another example, and this is one of my favorite ones to talk about, is a light rum that we produce that has a very pronounced creamy coconut chocolate type note. Now, you think of a light rum and you would expect that to be bland, almost neutral. But we like to tell the world that, yes, the human palate is very, very advanced and can detect notes sometimes as low as 5 parts per million. However, you have to know just what are the exact notes that are required to produce that. And so we have been able to narrow down, for example, the 2 or 3 components that in combination give that jive. And so in the right amount and in the and right balance, we're able to get that very pronounced note being very perceptible in the palate, even though they're only 10 parts per million in total. Certainly a very light rum. And so for us, knowing how we adjust the still, that craft, which knobs to turn, for how long, knowing also the science that by turning this knob, we produce the distillation reactions that favor certain congeners, we're able to maintain the quality that historically the rums coming from those stills have always been known for. To take it a step further in terms of our latest addition to our plant, so when I joined the company in 2007, we were in the throes of planning and designing our new multi-column still that was fully birthed in 2010. So this still for us is a pride and joy, because it is a success story of how we can take all of our accumulated learnings, both of our heritage and also of our additional craft and science learning, and apply that to build a completely new still, and then be able to operate it to be able to produce the identical quality spirit as the heritage stills were able to produce. This for us has been a success story. But more importantly, because this still is fully automated and can operate in different modes. It's 5 columns. Some columns operate under vacuum, some under atmospheric pressure, some under positive pressure. We can operate 3, 4, 5 columns, but depending on how we operate it, we can make a variety of different spirits, ranging from neutral all the way to light rums with different profiles, including that very specific light rum with the creamy chocolate note I talked about. That's an interesting one, because in starting up this new still, we had to figure out, we knew what components we're looking for, but where do we find them? And how do we coax those components into the spirit? That was a process. And I can tell you that we were quite elated when we were able to successfully find where those components are. Some, interestingly, were not even in the column. We had to go all the way up to our condensers and realize that, you know what, rather than bend those components off, let's close that off, let's reflux some of that back into our column and allow it to be coaxed into the product zone. A very interesting process, but again, it's where not just art, craft, and science, but now we've been able to bring technology into the mix and make our entire operation just modern edge. So because of that, we can now produce that light rum, for example, with more than 99% efficiency, 10% less molasses, 25% less steam, 50% less electricity compared to our heritage still. And so very much able to sustain our means of producing the quality that has been historical to our rums, but in a new technology directly off the still, no blending required. Before closing, I want to say a bit about green operations. We have installed at the same time as our new still wastewater treatment plant. That plant, of course, treats and reduces the organic component of our wastewater as much as 70% at the moment. We are, in fact, working on a very unique technology. We're partnering with two companies, and our early indications have been very successful. From design, we're going to go to build within the year. And if that is successfully commissioned, then we expect to take our conversion of our organic wastewater from being 70% reduced to 85% and above reduced. That would be industry leading for any part of the world. But importantly also, it generates biogas in the process, which we then use to fuel our steam boilers, replacing fuel oil. More than 55%. Our target is to get up to over 75% at the end of the day. The CO2 that's produced in the fermentation process is also purified. We've been doing so since 1986, well before the World Sustainable Summit in 1992, when global warming became a very hot topic. We've been doing that well before that. And so at the present time, we're in the throes of upgrading our plant to, again, the latest technology. So everything that we do at Demerara has been about our heritage, has been about our craft, has been about traditional practices, but we now bring that expertise to modern technology and modern approaches. I'd be happy to welcome your questions.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you very, very much, Shaun. That was really very interesting. We've got one question here from, I'm going to probably say this horribly wrong, so please I apologize now. Amy Esdale, what is your favorite Demerara rum?
I think the most interesting one is the double wooden pot still, for a couple of reasons, because it's the oldest, it's the only one of its kind, but also because the quality of the spirit that it makes is truly unique. I know of no other distillery that makes a spirit that can offer a variety of what I like to call the heavier type notes. Sometimes woody, sometimes grassy, sometimes leathery, sometimes earthy, depending on how the batch is tweaked. You know, we can tweak our takeoff points. We can sometimes recycle and spike the retort of that still so as to augment particular notes. But across that spectrum of notes I spoke about, we're truly unique in being able to produce those kinds of spirits. And for that, I love it. Also because sentimentally, the Eldorado 15 is what brought me into rum. It's the first of our Eldorado rums that won the rum trophy as world's best way back in 1998. At the time when I started starry-eyed high schooler was looking for a career. I loved math and science. Chemical engineering seemed like a wonderful thing to do. And, you know, Eldorado being declared world's best, that definitely caught my eye. Of course, I now know that the pot still plays an important part in the quality of that rum. So for all those reasons, that double wooden pot still is my favorite.
Most excellent, most excellent. Now, there's a question here from Mario Wade, which is, what advice would you give to a young blender?
I would say it's first of all important to be able to understand flavor components in a very detailed way. Even now, when we evaluate rums, we have to be able to, first of all, identify very specific flavor types. And because rums can often be complex, either because of a distillation process or because of blending, you really have to be nuanced in separating notes. Secondly, you have to understand how those notes are generated, and that's where the science comes in. So in my case, having a science background was very important. I can tell you as an example, I tasted a rum just recently, and just on the finish, so it had a very pronounced leathery type note, but it was balanced nicely by a bit of honey. So that's all well and good, but the finish was unique in that it was a soft vanilla note. And you wouldn't expect that to come at the end of the heavier notes that, you know, come earlier on. But when I looked at the components of that rum, it made sense. And so understanding the science sometimes goes a far way, because if I were to work backwards, let us say I wanted to have a vanilla note and didn't know how to get it. Now I do. And so blending is very much about, first of all, appreciating the notes, but also understanding where they come, so that if in future you wish to create a particular profile, you can actually select very judiciously to pull those notes together.
Excellent. That's a very, very thorough answer. Thank you very much. Now we've questions are coming in thick and fast here. So from Rachel Lafreniere, are you working with any other brands to discuss how the industry as a whole can work in a more eco-friendly way with your processes?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't name brands, but we do subscribe to a number of platforms. For example, the Carbon Disclosure Program, where we partner with one of our major stakeholders, so as to each year measure our carbon footprint, our water usage footprint, our energy intensity footprint, and devise ways by which we can reduce that. So much so that when we intervene in any of our operations, I know I talked today about distillation, but then there are the allied auxiliary processes. For example, there's rum storage and rum handling. And so we have been able to consolidate our rum storage and rum handling processes by automating that, so that the amount of carbon that's produced in transacting the movement of rum is reduced. And it goes all the way up to packaging types, and the efficiency of the operations. So the short answer is yes, we do. And it's a very active conversation, which we actively measure and report on an annual basis.
Thank you. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, I think what struck me when you were presenting was just how excited you were about the whole sustainability question and all the initiatives that you're currently got kind of going. So another question here from Trevor Volpe. What flavor characteristics or descriptors are unique to Demerara rum? So kind of like, what are the things that you would kind of maybe point to as being kind of, that's really uniquely Demerara?
Right. So I'd say first and foremost, the fact that our rums almost always have some fruity element to it. Because they're characteristically rounded and smooth, fruity notes tend to lend themselves well to that ball feel. There is secondarily an element of a sweet aromatic note. For example, vanilla might sometimes be present, or it may be honey, depending on the type of rum. And yes, we do have distillates that emphasize more of a honeyed note as opposed to vanilla note. So again, whether it's honey or vanilla, there may be something along that spectrum, or sugar, for example. And third, because of our heavier rums, we do sometimes bring a bit of wood and earth into the mix, leather and cigar. So it is really a wide variety of notes we can play around with.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, I've got another question here from Robert Reiser. It's very, very short and sweet. Is the molasses stirred? Now, I'm not 100% certain what he means by that. We might have to ask you, Robert, to kind of clarify, but I don't know. Maybe that makes complete sense to you, Shaun.
I rather suspect in the fermentation process, we do recirculate so as to keep the process well mixed. So it's not by stirring, but by recirculation that we keep that mixing going.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So the next question here is from Suzanne Stevenson. How do you maintain the consistency of quality for products such as El Dorado? These rums always taste amazing.
Aha. Well, again, it's by understanding the science that supports the craft. Because by understanding the science, we, for example, can define in the final distillate which components are specifically required. And so we do, apart from tasting, we also do the chemical analysis. That chemical analysis must meet the defined parameters, or otherwise it's not accepted. I should also say that, we have a three-tiered quality approval process. So at the production facility, there's the quality control team that's independent from our central quality assurance team, which ultimately has to approve the product. So even if the quality control of the plant approves it and the quality assurance says, no, I'm picking up something different, the production team has to go back to the table. But then finally, the blending facility has to thirdly accept the product as acceptable for their use before it is accepted. In other words, all three teams have to independently agree before the product goes into barrel. and same when it comes out. Because of that strict process, we're able to ensure at each stage the quality is maintained from the outset, but also that the checks and balances are in place. It's a very rigid process. Sometimes it can be frustrating, and I will admit, sometimes have rum in a tank for weeks while we figure out how to tweak small differences to get it back into conformance. But that ensures that when it gets into the bottle, the consumer can expect no less than the quality they've always known.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to just take one last question before we wrap up, I'm afraid. And it's a really interesting one here. It's talking about all of the old equipment and all of the very unique stills and the techniques you need to use to run those stills. And how you keep that kind of knowledge alive and how you keep young workers in Guyana interested to kind of join in and sort of be part of this kind of cultural heritage.
Excellent question. Thank you for that. So when I joined the company, the master distiller at the time, George Robinson, had been with the company for 40 years. And so we worked together for 4 years before he transitioned and I took over. When in fact, just before I took over, I would have recruited a number of, young and upcoming youngsters, technical guys who wanted to get into the industry. And so they, in turn, worked with the then team of junior distillers who would have worked for some 25, 30, 35 years at that time. And so today, they are the guys who are the lead distillers working along with me along the process. So there are two reasons. One, planning, all right? We always plan the succession, and two, long careers. So by this time, those guys are now with the company for over 12 years. And so pretty soon, we'll be training the next team of distillers who will understudy and ultimately take over from them. It's important to keep that knowledge alive. And so succession planning is extremely important to go from generation to generation.
Oh, that's fabulous to hear. Now, I'm afraid we're going to have to kind of like wrap things up now. So there are a couple of questions we haven't got to. I'm very sorry about that. But I'd just like to start by thanking Shaun for a very, very interesting presentation. And I've certainly picked up some very interesting points there. And also to thank everyone for joining in as well. It's great to hear your questions and sort of some really very interesting ones as well. Now, remember, this is recorded, so you can get onto our events hub on our YouTube channel if you want to watch it afterwards, and do subscribe as well, so you'll be kind of notified about upcoming events as well. And if this has piqued your interest a little bit, then hop over to our website to the Where to Study page and see if there is a local provider and kind of start your learning journey. It could be spirits, it could be something else. That's obviously up to you. So thank you all for joining. Thank you very much, Shaun. That was absolutely fascinating and fabulous. And hopefully see everyone soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.